Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Hi, and welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. And today's episode is all about healthy food and health journeys. I'm really excited to share it with you. So I'm speaking today with Arash Hashemi, who is the creator of Kaizen, the world's lowest carb, highest protein rice and pasta, which is made from lupini beans. And he's also the personality and recipe developer behind Shred Happens, which is an online social media community of just millions of people. So today, Arash shares quite a bit about his own health journey with us. It's really an inspiring story. Former Fortune 100 finance exec, Arash shares that he battled an unhealthy relationship with food for his adult life. And then finally, in 2017, weighing in at 350 pounds, he decided to leave his finance career and devote himself to getting healthy, changing his diet, his mindset, and his lifestyle. And he talks a lot about what that experience was like. So he, without really having, it wasn't really with the intention of like, I'm going to make this into a, million community with millions of people. He shares that he started Shred Happens as just a simple accountability tool to share recipes, chronicle his weight loss, and that he says he really fell in love with creating, sharing healthier versions of his favorite foods. And that this Instagram account just blossomed into an engaged online community that allowed him to focus on his passion. So creating healthy recipes, often with a Mediterranean or Middle Eastern spin. Arash pulls a lot from his Persian roots, and I really enjoyed hearing about some of his favorite Persian foods. I had a couple readers submitted questions before this episode, and I got a few requests asking for him to share his favorite Persian dishes. And I am completely going to butcher these. I apologize in advance, but I did look up on AI, like ChatGPT, just to tell me a little help with pronouncing these so I don't butcher it as bad as I might have otherwise if I was just relying on myself. But so a few that he shared are his favorites. So one of them is kebab ubide. And then another favorite of his is gourmet bademjun. And then an appetizer he was describing to me, which is it's like oh my gosh, how did he describe it? Like a shallot yogurt dip, which just sounds like absolutely delicious. So that one is called Masto Musir. And then this really incredible crispy like rice dish where it's like the rice from the bottom of the pan called tadi, which is something that, growing up, one of my best friends was from a Persian family. And, growing up, like, starting at like age 5, I remember like dinner at her house was always so exciting because just all the flavors and the different textures. And it's just such a cool change of pace from, what I was used to eating day to day. And just, it really, growing up, like being exposed to different food cultures was just something I didn't even realize how amazing that was until I went to college and started meeting people who grew up in other parts of the country who didn't have that same exposure. It was really special. So I love talking about food and hearing about what people love. So, yeah. So in this, just a little bit more like, so we do talk a little bit about the development of Kaizen and the products. And this is, I love exploring pasta alternatives as a dietitian. I don't know, this is one of my favorite categories to explore. And Kaizen is one of my favorite products that I've tried to date. So a lot of it came about because Arash really missed pasta and couldn't find an alternative that suited his new diet, his new lifestyle. So he and his wife, Madalina, were determined to create something that would satisfy cravings, but also meet his nutritional needs. So the company was launched after years of fine tuning in 2021, and it's something that it's so to date, it's the world's lowest carb, highest protein, gluten and grain-free pasta, as I said, made with lupini beans. So, you're still getting a high fiber, high protein dish. It's going to be really filling. And we don't, we barely scratched the surface when talking about Kaizen. That's why I'm adding a little bit now because it's something I'm enthusiastic about as an RD. I don't have any financial ties to it. I just think it's really cool. Wanted to share that with you. And just something else to know about this episode. If you are watching this on YouTube, um, so I had a little bit of an adventure the day that we were recording, um, where oh man, like, I'm sure this story will end up in a book in the future at some point because wow. But, I think something that I have one of my bad habits is that I try like, if I do have a day where I have time to do things, I tend to try to fit too much into one day. But then later that day, I ended up, I'd had to schedule a procedure, in my doctor's office for something different. And, it's so interesting, like, so some, for like certain types of appointments for women, it depends on where you're at in your menstrual cycle. So it's not always like up to you, like when you can schedule things exactly. You have to like trust your body and then find a time where your doctor can see you in that, where those windows line up, right? And but and it's so funny because there's so many things in women's health where, if but they're like, yeah, it's minor, it's not a big deal. Take some Advil, drive home. When it's like, for if it were like men going through something similar, they'd be like under sedation and like would need to have someone with them to like take them home probably. Like it's so anyway, I drove home, thought I was fine. Um, not realizing that you know, fainting was something that had to be on my radar. And I do have a history of vasovagal syncope. It just hadn't happened in so many years that I just like kind of forgot about how sometimes there's this perfect storm of things going on and then a trigger and then like lights out. So as Arash is so eloquently talking about these different topics, I can feel myself break out in a sweat. I get all like shaky and my vision starts to go dark. And like, I'm sure if you are looking on YouTube, you can probably see my eyes start to dilate. And I was like trying to hold myself upright so I wouldn't pass out as we were recording. You can't hear it in this video, but I did take a pause for a sec because I needed to just go like lay down on the floor. And I didn't, and this is the part that probably will be like in something at some point. Like I didn't think to just be like, oh, I have to stop now. Like I was this just like I was like, oh, I'm just gonna like, not not go let me just like lay down on the floor for a second. We'll just get right back into recording. It was a whole thing, but Arash is such a good sport and so kind about, following up with me afterwards to make sure we had all the info we needed for this episode. And I'm really excited to share it with you guys. So, a longer than normal introduction, but I just wanted to say for any of you who are watching this on video and you start to see me looking a little like out of it, that's just why. Adventures in vasovagal syncope and being a female in today's United States medical system. So, without further ado, yeah, let's get to this episode. Rash, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm so glad that we could finally talk. I know we've been talking about doing an episode for, oh gosh, months now. So it's nice to finally be here with you and talking. Now, okay, now I know I've chatted with you about your health journey, but I would love for our listeners who may not know your story yet, could you tell us a little bit about what your own journey has looked like and that's kind of brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first impression normally that people have is my social media page, and it's easy to think that I have some sort of food or restaurant background or a chef background, but the reality is I'm just like so many other Americans or Canadians, wherever you may live. I'm just a guy who has struggled with, my weight pretty much all my life. By the time I was in my early 20s, I was over 320, 330 pounds. I don't know the exact number because I stopped getting on the scale. And, that's despite having tried a lot of the fad diets, for lack of a better word, that were out there growing up, whether it's the South Beach diet, Atkins, the Zone, Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, cabbage soup, you name it. I've tried them all. And, they were all different in many respects, but the one constant was that they were somewhat restrictive in a way. and they only lasted a certain number of days or weeks. And, after the initial 5, 10 pounds that everybody kind of sees, I gained that weight back plus more. And so that cycle kind of continued through on the majority of my life. And it wasn't until 2017, at that point I was doing really well. I had a great career in corporate America and finance and strategy. I was climbing the ladder, so to speak, and had a large team, had a lot of great responsibility. I was working on some exciting projects, but I wasn't really being a leader for myself. And at that time, I went to my wife, Madalina, who also worked at the company. And I just kind of mentioned that I wanted to make a change. And so I started my Instagram account. I started eating healthier versions of my favorite foods. I started kind of cutting out more processed foods, processed sugar. I started kind of seeing results. I think that I've continued that. I have some work that I want to continue to do, but I'm just a normal guy who's struggled with weight, and I've started to realize that eating healthier versions of my favorite foods that are flavorful, perhaps with spices, herbs, healthy fats, that's made it excitable, enjoyable, sustainable, and satiating for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. To echo what you're saying, the diet culture and just all the diets out there that are sold to people, it's wild, the stuff that, people are conditioned to think they need to do to lose weight. And I think that, from my experience as a dietitian for, over a decade, is just I found that when people make it enjoyable and they include their favorite foods, sometimes, slightly little tweaks to some of those recipes, like that's when
Yeah,
they feel good and they see long-term results. And yeah,
absolutely.
and so it sounds like for you, it was a lot about just cutting out the processed stuff and coming up with healthier versions of your favorite foods. Was exercise part of the picture at all when you were
Yeah.
starting?
Yeah, and I think, for me, I'd say like there's a lot of options that are out there. And I think, those were all successful in a way, in the sense that there was probably bits and pieces of each that I took away that worked for me. I think we look at, certain diets and like we're like, all right, this one, you don't necessarily have to play it by the book, right? You can take certain pieces of it and make it your own. Everybody's got a different schedule. Everybody's got different responsibilities, whether that's at work or at home. And so I think the key really is to find something that works for you. And I think that's probably where I had most success, where I was trying to figure out things that, different bits and pieces of each that worked well with me. And then I adjusted as time went on as well. So, when I initially started, I cut out processed foods and a lot of the sugars and simple carbs that I was eating. That made a big difference. At some point, I started to plateau again. And so I adjusted things there. And then, a few months after that, I adjusted. So, it's finding something that works, but also continuing to be a student and learning and adapting as circumstances change, as your environment changes, as your body changes. The body that you have today isn't necessarily going to respond to what it will 6 months down the line, a year down the line, 5 years down the line. Back to your point around physical, I'd say for me, 99% of it really was the foods that I was eating, both the quantities as well as the quality of it. As I was gaining weight, I had gym memberships, I had personal trainers. It wasn't that I was completely a couch potato, but I just couldn't, there was nothing that I could have done to really outrun the bad food decisions that I was making. So when I initially started my latest, endeavor, I focused primarily on food. And then I had this big goal of doing a half Ironman, even though I couldn't even run, for a minute, let alone a mile. For those that aren't familiar with an Ironman or half Ironman, it's a running, then sorry, it's swimming, then biking, and then finishing it off with a half marathon. So for me, I just kind of had that big goal, but then I broke it down to very small, tactical, manageable steps. And so I completely ignored the swimming and the biking disciplines, and I just focused on, all right, I can only run a minute today, let's say. And so I started adding little by little. My first kind of mini goal, so to speak, on that journey was a 5K. And then I completed that. And then I did a 10K and I completed that. And I slowly kind of started build out from there. But for me, I've actually enjoyed exercising. I enjoy it for mostly the mental aspects of things and how I think better, more clearly, how I feel, which is why I love to start my days when I don't have back injury as I do now in the mornings with a workout. But yeah, for me, the food was the bigger factor.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So because I'm that person with my clients where they always something I hear all the time is I've never told anybody this before, but and something that comes up a lot is they will tell me that doctors have not asked them if they exercise, but just tell them, oh well, if that person is overweight, they're like, well, you should start exercising, and the person's like, well, I run marathons, like, f you, like,
Yeah.
and I think that but also what you said, it is so individual. Every body is different. Every person is different. It's what works for one person can be so different from what helps somebody else thrive. And I love what you said about finding what works for you and also being curious about that process. And because we're always evolving. So I think that what pattern works well for someone at one phase in their life might look different from what works somewhere down the road. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and I hear a lot from people who follow my page. They, I'm blessed to have an incredible community of supporters, and I get emails, and people share stories, and I hear the most common story is, "Hey, I was overweight at this point in my life. I made a change, and I was able to lose X amount of weight, and then life happened." Right? Somebody had a kid. There was a divorce. There was a breakup. Kids moved out of the house, something happened, and the weight came back on, an injury, whatever it may be. And like that to me, things happen. Right now, actually, about 6 months ago, I hurt my back, and I wasn't able to really exercise much. And anytime I tried to get back in, I ended up aggravating it even more. And so that kind of set me back on a lot of my goals. And you know, I really had to try really hard not to get disenchanted and, kind of fall back into my old habits. Life happens, things are going to happen. Sometimes you just need to persevere through the storm. Sometimes you just need to let it happen and go through it. I think a lot of times we put these strict timelines and deadlines and stretch goals, and the moment they don't hit, we immediately consider something a failure, or we throw in the towel, or we go back to our old ways. I think the most important thing we can do is just to kind of weather those storms, whatever they may be. We just got to get through the storm.
I love that so much. And I feel like that can apply to so many things in life, whether it's like our health, our family,
Yeah.
our business, or education, whatever it might be. There's so many things like that's so valuable.
Yeah.
Now, I know, from having worked for many years with people who are working towards weight loss goals or health goals of some kind. But I feel like this is something that's been on my mind a little bit more, as I think in the media, we've been hearing more about like weight loss medications and more people speaking more openly about different aspects of weight loss journeys. And I'd love to hear anything you're comfortable sharing, but, mentally, what, as you were making these changes and, on that path, what was helpful for you mentally?
Yeah. I think the biggest shift, and it's still a constant kind of struggle, right? Like the biggest thing for me is, am I making the right decision now? First of all, the biggest thing mentally is focusing on just the task ahead. A lot of times I think we tend to overcomplicate things. Let's say you want to lose, 100 pounds, 50 pounds, whatever it may be. We tend to focus on that number. And I think for the overwhelming majority of my life, anytime I set out to do it, I had always focused on that big number, right? Or we want to run a marathon, or we want to lose 100 pounds, or we want to, whatever it is that we're working on. We tend to work with that big number and big goal. And I think the biggest mental shift that I had to make was just dissecting it down to the tiniest possible goal, right? The next 5 pounds or the next 2 pounds, or hey, this, today, how am I going to live my best life today? What does success look like today? Tomorrow, how will I feel like today? How did I improve today? It's always just kind of getting back and really focusing on the immediate task at hand. And I think a lot of people get overwhelmed, whether it's a personal or professional goal, by the bigger thing, whereas you could really make an incredible level of progress by just focusing on the smallest next step you can possibly take on anything it is that you're doing.
Thank you for sharing that. That is
And then
so
the second thing
valuable.
is, I think a lot of people struggle with this is, despite, people that lose hundreds of pounds, people that, completely transform themselves mentally, they're in a different spot. They're always kind of in the same spot they were, whether that's body issues or body image issues or whatever it may be. And I'm part of that, so I think, just kind of adapting to the new identity or the new person, the new behaviors that you've set. That's a big struggle. And I don't have the right answer for that, but that does kind of get in the way of things quite a bit.
Thank you for being honest about that. I think sometimes there's a lot of pressure to, especially on social media, I think there can be a lot of pressure to paint a certain picture, and that's not always helpful for people. I
Yeah.
think sometimes the reality is much more so.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest kind of struggles with social media, to kind of be, discovered in a way. A lot of the content is over exaggerated or dramatized, or it's I actually have a newsletter, and I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. It was on the subject of like working out, and I was saying, hey, just a 20-30 minute walk can do wonders. A lot of times we tend to, skip the gym because we couldn't get a full hour in, because what we see on Instagram is this incredibly fit person that's doing pull-ups and chin-ups and sit-ups, and they're incredibly toned. And so the things that we see on Instagram tend to not be kind of the reality of what's attainable for the average person. And I think, it's great to use those individuals as resources, but I really think that we need to be very cognizant about, kind of digesting that information, digesting that type of content through a lens of, all right, what's, a practicality, so to speak, what's practical for you in your schedule and what you can do and where you are currently in your journey and doing that. And everybody's fighting a different battle, right? So maybe they're doing great in the gym one day, but they've got other issues that they're working on. So I think we kind of just need to like look at things with a level of practicality.
Gosh, and maybe it's just from, hearing stories from my clients over the years, or even just my own health adventures, we'll call them. Like, it's given me a lot of, one thing that's been helpful is, it's really helped me whenever I'm engaging in social media, just to remember, like, I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes for that person.
Right.
Like what we're seeing is not necessarily reflective of the whole picture. There's a lot we probably do not know. So another reason to always be kind
Absolutely.
when we're showing up on there.
I'll give a great parallel here, right? I make and share recipes. And so when I'm filming my recipes, I'll film for, let's say, an hour or half an hour, whatever it may be. But then there's the editing process, right? And so whether it's I'm going to pick the best slicing of tomato I can, the best slicing of avocado, the best, and so that's a food example, but there's people that do this with, workouts and in the gym, and a glimpse into their daily lives, right? So it is the highlight reel, so to speak. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Is there anything, something that does come up a lot in, when we're talking about, working towards a goal, reaching a goal, if we're talking about health or weight related goals, maintaining in a certain place. And, it's just something I've seen my clients struggle with a lot, is that it's really not just about getting there. It's about staying there comfortably, in a sustainable way. And is there anything that, you have found helpful, or, advice that you would give for somebody in terms of maybe what to keep in mind about that?
Yeah, I'd say I'm learning, and this is a learning process, but I'm learning that the only constant really is change. I started on this journey and I was doing certain things, and then, I got a back injury and that changed things. I moved and my lifestyle changed. So initially, right now I'm, in addition to social media, I have a low carb, high protein pasta and rice company. And so, I didn't necessarily have that obligation. And so what I'm learning is that you're going to constantly be faced with different challenges, inside and outside forces. Something's going to happen in the family or your friends or social dynamics. And so you've just got to be open to change. And if something's important to you, you've got to find a way to prioritize that and to kind of rethink things. That's probably the biggest thing. And as long as you kind of accept that and expect that, then I think you're miles ahead. Because a lot of times what happens is somebody sets out to do something, and let's say they start training for a marathon and they complete that marathon, and it's very difficult to, let's say, keep up with the running or the training that's required to keep that up. Life happens, and the next thing it's 6 months down the line, and you can't run 5 miles anymore, let alone 26 miles or 24 miles. So I think it's just learning that you're going to go through different seasons, different phases, and just constantly being open to change and trying new things. That's probably my biggest learning and advice.
I love that. I actually think
It's very
about that a lot.
uncomfortable.
Right.
Very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think that sometimes that gets downplayed, that, that piece doesn't get talked about enough. That it's completely human and okay to need to change. And if it feels hard, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you.
Right.
It's just that you're having a human experience and needing to figure stuff out for yourself and whatever makes sense for you.
A sports analogy here, I try to often use is, whether you're a basketball fan or, or a football fan. So let's take the New England Patriots, for example, as a football analogy, right? What enabled the Patriots to win a championship in one year doesn't necessarily set them up to repeat the same thing the following year or the following year, right? You've got to constantly be adapting, learning, shifting with the environment, so to speak, to be able to win and to kind of achieve your goal. And that's the same in life too. So even the best teams with the best talent, with the best resources, have to continuously adapt and change in order to be able to achieve the next best thing.
Now, a question I got from a few of my listeners, because I did sometimes before I have a guest on, I'll put up like a poll, be like, "Hey, does anyone have questions for this when we do our podcast recording?" And I had a couple people ask me if who really they're like, "Oh my gosh, I love his page, I love his recipes," but they also wanted to know if at any point you had considered weight loss surgery or what your thoughts were about that.
I did. So first, I think again, there's a lot of noise in the system, right? I think everybody has an opinion about everything in any field, whether that's weight loss or any other aspect of life. And I think ultimately, you as a listener, you as somebody who's struggling with it, you know what's best for you. And I think there's a lot of other dynamics that are out there that are particular to each person. And so I think like in consultation, certainly with your doctor and with your family and those that are closest to you, only you can make that determination. So I don't necessarily, I don't judge or I don't have an opinion on whether somebody achieved weight loss or was able to turn their life around because whether they, got gastric bypass surgery or whether they took Ozempic or whether they went vegan or keto, whatever it may be. I think at the end of the day, you've got to do what makes sense for you and what's most sustainable for you. And I think a lot of factors have probably led to you getting to where you are. I think the thing that I would kind of suggest is to kind of understand what those behaviors or triggers or reasons were as to what led you in that first place, and to kind of keep that in mind as you make that big decision. Because there's people that get weight loss surgery and they do well for a while, but they haven't necessarily addressed that kind of root cause. And eventually they make their way back to where they were initially. So I think you've got to kind of in tandem have really transparent, direct conversations with yourself as to, what adjustments you need to make. And then if weight loss surgery is the right path forward, then you should absolutely do it if a doctor thinks that makes sense for you.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's a lot of, it's an interesting time, I think with all of the medications being added to these conversations, it's a lot to keep in mind. Now, what about, showing up and sharing your health journey on social media? Is there anything that you wish you had known when you were starting out or advice that you would give to somebody who's kind of doing the same?
Yeah, I think, there's certainly an opportunity. When I first started the account, in full transparency, I intended to talk a little bit more about, weight loss and my struggles and what led me to it and, the struggles that I have, even today. And I think I didn't do as good enough of a job being vulnerable and taking my audience through the process as much. And so I think, and that's okay. There's people that are really open about their struggles that I even follow and very closely and consider really good friends. And then there's people that kind of do things behind the scenes. Again, it's really up to you. I think that the number one thing is that for some people, they have to focus on, let's say, managing an addiction or a problem with drugs, alcohol, or whatever vice that there is. For some people, you've got to continuously manage your, weight or eating habits and eating patterns. And so I think that's something that's not really talked a lot about. Food, especially the way foods are processed today and marketed to us, there's a lot of science and effort and lab work that's required to get things on the shelf. And foods are engineered in a way to keep us eating, to get us addicted, to reach for that second, third, fourth serving. Foods are packaged in a way to be enticing. And so I think there's a mental aspect of this that isn't really discussed much, that a lot of people struggle with. We tend to talk about, oh, you're eating too much or too little and not the right things. The reality is there's a bigger conversation about the quality of the foods that we're eating and, kind of our behaviors towards food and what makes us reach for more and why we're overeating in the first place.
Okay, so you actually just gave me a great segue. I wanted to ask you about Kaizen foods, the low carb rice and pasta. Can you tell us a little bit about just sort of, how that came about and what kind of products you guys make?
Yeah, so I didn't actually, there wasn't a plan to really create Kaizen. I was going through my weight loss journey and, I was seeing a lot more healthier, lower carb, higher protein options of my favorite foods pop up. And in 2019, I went to Madalina. I was like, gosh, there really isn't a good low carb, high protein pasta that's available. They either, had too many carbs or questionable ingredients, or they tasted like fish or smelled like fish. And so I said, you know what, let's kind of create one. And both pasta and rice are near and dear to me. All my favorite foods are either rice or pasta based dishes. And so we decided to set out to create a high protein, low carb option. And I won't bore you with the details, but we've had about 4 or 5 different iterations of the product. The first one started in 2019, and we've been going ever since. Actually, the first version was created with almond flour. We initially launched that, got feedback from our customers for about 5 to 6 months, quickly realized that consumers wanted more. And so we ultimately ended up pivoting to using lupini beans. They're an ancient superfood that have been consumed for centuries, dating back as far as the ancient Egyptians, ancient Romans. They've got all 9 amino acids. They're incredibly high protein, low carb, gluten free and grain free. And so we launched our pasta with that. And luckily, thanks to my incredible community, I've been able to stay really close to them. And with each launch, getting feedback from them, what they like, what they don't like, what they want to see more of. And so we currently have a lineup of the highest protein, lowest carb, gluten-free certified, kosher certified pasta and rice. So our pasta and rice both have 6 net carbs, 20 grams of protein, and 130 calories of serving. So that's, if you kind of compare that to regular pasta, it's got 80% or 85% fewer net carbs or 85% fewer carbs, sorry, 3x the protein and, a fraction of the calories. And, cooks in about 4 to 5 minutes. And it's really helped me kind of keep having my favorite foods. So I have either my pasta or rice every night. It's high protein, it's low carb, it's satiating, and it helps me kind of enjoy my favorite foods without feeling deprived.
I love it. And we'll make sure we link to that in the show notes. And it's delicious, by the way. I have tried it. Very so versatile too. Now, if people want to learn more about you and your work, buy the pasta, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, so I'm mostly active on Instagram. So Shred happens on Instagram, Facebook, and on TikTok. We also have Kaizen Food Company on Instagram, TikTok as well. My website's shredhappens.com. I send a weekly newsletter with just kind of my thoughts, free recipes, and a product of the week. And you can also email me directly from the website as well. I try to respond as best as I can, but I do get a lot of emails. But I think staying close to my community and kind of interacting and engaging with my community is my favorite part of what I do. So I love hearing from people.
Oh, I have one last question for you, and this is something I ask everybody. And that question is today, this moment in time, what does healthy living mean to you?
Great question. I think it's feeling your best. I think, when you wake up in the morning, are you excited? Or are you excited about what you're about to do? Are you excited about the next 24 hours, so to speak? And if today was the last day of your life, What would you do? And I think for a lot of us, we just kind of go through life. And again, it's not going to be perfect every day, but we go through large segments of our life or patches of time in our life when we're not excited and happy about what we're actually going to do that day. And so I think it all starts with, kind of taking inventory of, are you excited about what you're going to do? And sometimes we have jobs or relationships that don't necessarily best serve us. And so those are a larger conversation to tackle. But, what's something that you can just do for 5 minutes, for 15 minutes, for 20 minutes that can kind of change your outlook on your life and the day that you've got ahead so you can show up as your best self. And so for some people that just may mean standing outside in the sun for 5 minutes. For some people may have a little bit more time. Maybe you can go for a walk. Maybe you can, do some weights. Maybe you can just sit and meditate. We tend to just kind of get up and look at our phone and rush out of bed and go to work. So I think finding ways to be living a life that makes you more fulfilled and happy and in tune with your daily, your needs on a daily basis is arguably the best thing that you can do. And, building off of that. So for me, healthy living is beyond, weight. It's beyond the foods that you're eating, but are you excited? How's your outlook? And then what little things are you doing to influence that to live a better life?
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You guys, for all of you listening, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Arash, thank you for being a guest on the podcast. It's been
Thanks for having
wonderful.
me, Jess.
As always, guys, have a wonderful day and we'll talk soon.